Do you sometimes feel you get lost in the crowd? Just one person among many. Maybe you like that. Maybe you like the anonymity and the ability to go below the radar. But maybe we like it less if it means we feel unimportant or small or insignificant. That our concerns, even who we are not really noticed. There's been a lot of talk about crowds this week in the news. The number of people the government should let into Wembley Stadium to be the crowd for the Euro 2020 finals. There's been talk about the number and restrictions on the crowds who are going to fill the athletic stadium in Japan for the Olympics in a few weeks' time. Those, of course, are all pretty positive personal experiences, we hope, for the people in those particular crowds. But what if our personal experience is not so positive? What if we need help or support for a particular issue at a particular time in life, and yet we feel lost in the crowd in which we live and move? Just one among many. Does anyone know? Does anyone notice? Does anyone really care? Well, as we continue our journey through Mark's Gospel, the account we just heard read from Mark chapter 5, I think gives great encouragement into these questions. Because it shows that Jesus gives time to heal the one who is hurting in the crowd. I'll say that again. Jesus gives time to heal the one who is hurting in the crowd. Now, this account may be quite well known to some of us, so I'd just like to retell it, but just try and get beneath the surface a little bit. Yet again, at the beginning of this account, Jesus is surrounded by a large crowd, verse 21. A crowd who are eager to hear him and to see him perform miracles. But then from within the crowd, one man falls at Jesus' feet, a man called Jairus, and he is hurting. His daughter is literally dying and he can do nothing about it. And so in anguish, he falls before Jesus as a last resort and he pleads earnestly for Jesus to come and simply touch his daughter so she would be healed. Jairus has faith, verse 23. Faith that Jesus can heal his daughter with just a touch. Just put his hands on her. That's all he asks for. And Jesus goes with him. He gives time to this one man who is hurting in the crowd. The crowd follows, and the crowd is so big that it presses in all around Jesus, verse 24. There's no space. He's hemmed in. He's jostled from side to side as he walks. And in the midst of this crowd, a woman who has suffered from bleeding, not just for a few days, a month as part of her period, but every day for 12 years comes onto the scene. And she too has faith like Jairus. Faith that Jesus can heal her with just a touch. Look at verse 28. If I just touch his clothes, she thinks, I will be healed. But you notice it's not Jesus touching her, but her touching him. Because the Jewish law clearly stated that if you bled like she was bleeding, you were unclean. That anything you touched, that anyone who touches her will become unclean. So she can't ask Jesus to touch her. He'll never do such a thing. She must just try to touch him quietly, anonymously, hoping somehow she won't make him unclean just in case it all goes wrong. And so she creeps up behind him and just touches the cloak. And immediately, verse 29, her bleeding stops. And she knows, she feels inside that she's free from her suffering, her hurting, and she has been hurt big time for 12 years. Ostracized by her community, cast out of social interaction, no physical contact with anyone. She's actually been lost on the edge of the crowd for 12 years because she is seen as unclean. And despite the crowd pressing into Jesus, he knows power's gone out of him, that someone has touched him. And so he stops and asks who it was. He takes time to find the one among the crowd. When the disciples and everyone else can only see the crowd, look at verse 30. Jesus stops and turns around and says, who touched my clothes? And the disciples look a little bit confused and say, Jesus, there are people all around you. There are people touching you from every side. How can you ask who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who'd done it. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear told him the whole truth. And he said to her, Daughter, Your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be healed from your suffering. How tenderly Jesus speaks as he gives time to heal the one hurting in the crowd. Can we just notice what Jesus says and what he does? He says her faith has healed her, and on one level, yes, that's true. But we also know that it's Jesus' power that has healed her. Verse 30 says he felt the power go out of him. It's actually the power of Jesus that heals the woman. But her faith is what puts her in the situation where he can heal her. And guys, that's still true today. Jesus still has power to heal. He simply asks us to have faith, to put ourselves in the places and the situations where he can. Well, this woman's now free. Free to live and love and laugh and touch and be touched. And we all know how important that is after just 1 year of COVID, let alone 12 years. She is indeed freed from her suffering, verse 34. But someone else isn't. Have we forgotten about Jairus, I wonder? He's suffering big time, waiting for Jesus to get a move on and stop faffing around about who's touched him or who hasn't touched him, because his daughter's dying, and every second counts. Or it did. Because his daughter is now dead. And he must just look at Jesus with tear-filled eyes, only to hear Jesus say, believe. You did before. Will you now? And so he leads Jesus and 3 of the disciples to his home, and there is raw grief everywhere, and Jesus simply says, the child isn't dead, but asleep, verse 39. Not because she's not died, they know she's dead, that's why they weirdly laugh at him. How can he be so insensitive? But he knows what he's about to do. And that as the author of life, he has power over death. And so he goes into the home and he does exactly what Jairus had originally asked. He just touches his daughter with his hand and he whispers, little girl, I say to you, get up. And she does. And I bet there was laughter after that, or different laughter than before, because now they're laughing with joy and relief and huge thankfulness. Maybe it's a little bit like that scene at the end of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where Frodo wakes up in Rivendell and his friends come in, and Gandalf starts laughing, and Frodo starts laughing, and Sam and Pippin and Merry start laughing. And Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas join in, and all this community can do is to hug and to laugh, laughing with relief and joy. We see in these 2 beautiful interactions that Jesus gives time to heal the one who is hurting in the crowd. And in 2,000 years, Jesus hasn't changed. He still longs to do that to those who are hurting today. Some of us listening to this today will be hurting. It may be something that's only been going on for a short time, like Jairus, but it hurts. Or it may be something that's been going on a long time, like the woman, and it still hurts every day. And it can be easy to feel lost in the crowd, just one among many, where no one really knows and maybe no one really cares in day-to-day life, or even if you're part of church. But Jesus cares. He longs to give time to heal the one who is hurting in the crowd. Where do you need Jesus' touch today? I pray this account would encourage you to keep trusting, to keep believing, to have faith. To put yourself in that attitude or mindset or situation where you believe he can heal the hurt, even if it takes time. It took 12 years for this woman to be healed. Jesus cares. He cares about the one, and he cares whether we're intentionally asking for his help like Jairus, or just tentatively hoping that he can help like the woman. Where do you need the touch of Jesus in your life today? Ask him to bring healing. Of course, not all of us are hurting today. But all of us, if we're following Jesus, are called to be like him. And here that simply looks like giving time to bring healing to the one who's hurting in the crowd. I wonder who needs the touch of Jesus in your crowd. The people in your family or your workplace or your club? What about the crowd here in town church? The crowd in the congregation you may be part of? What about the crowd around town church, those who live, work or play in this part of town? Do we look? Do we notice? Do we give time to see, time to stop, time to help? On my heart over the last few months has been the question, who are the marginalised around us at town church? In other words, who is lost in the crowd because actually they're on the edge of the crowd of life? Like the woman who comes to see Jesus, who is left out of life for 12 years because of her bleeding. Who is hurting and Jesus longs to heal on the margins of our community? We need to think, we need to pray about that as we move forwards in the autumn as a church. But today, this week, over the summer, how could we help to bring the touch of Jesus to ones who are hurting? What could we do? And where do we start? Well, God bless you this day.